It's the early hours of a Wednesday morning, and the crew of a fishing vessel spots a lifeboat drifting near the French coastline. Inside, they find only a jacket and a checkbook under the name of a Dr. Yves Godard, a physician from Caen, France, who had recently vanished at sea with his wife and 2 children. But what began as a routine missing persons case would soon spiral into something far stranger. A trail of unsettling evidence, conflicting clues, and increasingly surreal turns, quickly becoming one of the most unusual mysteries Europe had ever seen. This is the Godard family disappearance. It's a gloomy Tuesday morning, and local police get a call about a suspicious vehicle that's been parked at the Port du Sablon in Saint-Malo for a couple days. Its continued presence raised suspicion, prompting the authorities to examine it closely. The vehicle turned out to belong to the same doctor who went missing with his family a week prior. A Volkswagen camper van Model T4 has been sitting right where he left it, unnoticed, for several days. As soon as the van was opened, though, it became very clear to the officers that this was no ordinary disappearance. First, significant traces of blood were discovered throughout the whole interior. The volume and distribution suggested a serious, possibly fatal injury. Second, used morphine vials were found discarded, indicating the admission of strong sedatives. And third, cleaning products, including an opened bottle of Mir, a cleaning detergent, and a can of Yako VX500 motor oil, indicating an attempt to clean or mask evidence. The discovery of the van and its contents marked a turning point. What was initially considered a possible maritime accident began to appear more like a premeditated crime. What took place in his van? Where was Yves and his family? And whose blood was this? A search of the Godard family home was issued soon after, situated in the calm, peaceful neighborhood of Tilly-sur-Seine. In the living room, significant bloodstains were found on the underside of the couch cushions, which had been flipped over to hide. More blood was found on the staircase leading upstairs into the master bedroom. Lifting the mattress, investigators found a large, dark bloodstain about 30 centimeters wide, soaked into its underside. Additionally, fine droplets of blood sprayed on a nearby wall, at neck height, suggesting a violent wound. There was no sign of forced entry or burglary. The crime scene appeared to have been deliberately cleaned up. Surfaces were wiped down, and evidence was either hidden or sanitized. After forensic analysis, the blood was confirmed to be from Marie-France Godard, Yves' wife, and the mother of his children. With the blood found in the house and the van being confirmed to be hers, the next step was to find a rational explanation of what could have happened that day. According to Bernadette Schall, Godard's next-door neighbor, the family left that morning in their Volkswagen van in a hurry. Around 8:45 a.m., she swears to the police that she saw Yves, the 2 kids, and Marie-France, who apparently gave her a little wave. Her words, of course, are those of an elderly woman, which are necessarily subject to caution. In reality, Yves had reserved a few weeks earlier a Sunny Odyssey, a 9-meter sailboat from Jeannot shipyards. And according to the rental company, only Yves and his children showed up that morning. Did Yves kill his own wife? If he did, how did he dispose of her body? The drive between their house and the port was around an hour and 45-minute journey. Surely he couldn't have done it then, and especially while his kids are still in the van. Maybe Marie-France was never in the vehicle, and the crime happened the night before. In both cases, one thing is certain. Both the house and the van were cleaned in a hurry. The blood-red mattress and the sofa cushions were both turned over to hide the evidence. And the van, for its part, an attempt was made to sanitize it with water and cleaner. But as far as the police were concerned, Yves Godard was no longer a missing person. He was now their prime suspect in what was quickly becoming an international murder mystery. On September 10th, 1999, a judicial murder investigation is opened. An international arrest warrant is issued against Yves, and within a day, his profile is uploaded to Interpol's Red Notice database, a signal to 190 countries to stop this man if you see him. Every port along the channel was scanned: ferry terminals, private airfields, and customs offices. If Yves was trying to flee the country, the walls were closing in fast. But despite the days of effort, the sailboat remained missing, the children lost, Marie-France gone, and Yves had vanished. One question remained though. How could a doctor and a family man from Normandy go from a well-known and respected member of his community to becoming the most wanted man in Europe? Who exactly was Yves Godard? Long before this whole situation, Yves worked as a doctor in Caen, a mid-sized city in northwestern France. But he was no ordinary physician. He specialized in acupuncture and alternative medicine. He ran a small clinic, and those who knew him described him as a calm, kind man who's deeply committed to his work. Among colleagues, Yves stood out for his unconventional yet effective methods. He was soft-spoken and focused, and while he never sought recognition, it often found him. At home, he appeared just as devoted. He lived with his wife, Marie-France, and their two children, Camille and Marius, in a modest house situated in a quiet Normandy village. Neighbors described them as a peaceful family. Yves would often spend weekends with his kids, fishing or playing in the garden. Despite a busy schedule, he made time for them. Marie-France was seen as warm and kind. Though a bit reserved, friends described her as a loving mother who had overcome personal hardship and found stability with Yves. There was no signs of conflict, no arguments, no disturbances. From the outside, they looked like a balanced, close-knit family. And yet, out of the blue, on a random day, Yves cancels all his appointments, wraps up his remaining tasks, and quietly shuts his clinic. Days later, he's wanted internationally for a crime no one could have ever imagined him capable of committing. But there was no time to understand his reasons. The police were already running against the clock, and as investigators began tracing his last known steps, the last confirmed sighting of Yves by French authorities was on the evening of September 2nd, 1999. French customs officers aboard a patrol vessel were conducting a routine maritime inspection off the coast of Brittany, between Cap Frahel and Cap Durkee. They approached a sailboat that was running on engine power despite calm seas and perfect wind, an unusual choice that caught their attention. This sailboat was the Nick, the boat Yves had rented just a day earlier. After boarding the boat and checking their papers, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, except for a persistent gut feeling the officers couldn't shake. One of them would later recall that something felt off, so much so that he made a passing comment to his colleagues. "That guy gave me a weird vibe, like a man who had just thrown his wife overboard." In hindsight, this remark feels less like a casual joke and more like a spontaneous revelation, an unconscious insight that brushed too close to the truth. They didn't know this at the time, but Marie-France was already missing, and her blood had already soaked through the family home. The Nick was later seen anchored in Brehek Bay. Over the following day or two, several witnesses recalled seeing Eve and his two children in the area. On September 4th, hikers walking along the cliffs of Pointe de Menard noticed the Nick slowly drifting at Brehek Bay, apparently empty, with no one on board. This would be the last confirmed sighting of the Nick. On the 16th, 11 days after the dinghy was found, amateur sailors off the coast of the Channel Islands of Guernsey and Alderney discover a life jacket floating offshore. The jacket was traced back to the Nick. Then, on the 23rd, a life raft was recovered near Bridport on England's southern coast. At first glance, the evidence all pointed to a maritime disaster. Did the Nick sink? Did Eve and his kids drown out at sea? But closer inspection revealed the opposite. The canvas canopy seemed to have been slashed cleanly with a blade, and the gas cartridge that inflates the raft was missing. More importantly, the raft was discovered weeks after the supposed accident at sea, yet the raft seemed in pristine condition, like it was deployed only a few days earlier. It appeared like the raft didn't merely drift there over time, but had likely been placed deliberately. There was no debris from the Nick that was ever recovered. No snapped mast, no torn sails, no hull fragments. Normal debris one can expect to find after an accident at sea. It seemed like someone was trying to stage a faux shipwreck. This video was a shared project made in collaboration with Vision, a French YouTuber who's just as obsessed with strange cases and deep dives as I am. Everything you saw here was built together, start to finish. A French version of this exact video is also up on his channel. If you like this format and would like to see more mysteries like this, let us know in the comments below. On October 2nd, 1999, out of nowhere, the police brigade received an anonymous letter in the mail. The letter simply reads, "Dr. Yves Godard is indeed alive. He lives in the Irish Sea, on the Isle of Man. Take this seriously." The letter had no signature, no date, and no usable fingerprints. French authorities immediately reached out to local police on the British island. Surprisingly, officers on the Island of Man confirmed a French man accompanied by a boy and a girl did stay at the Menine Hotel. An employee at the tourist office recounts how a man with a young boy and girl came in asking for a room for 4 to 5 days. She told him that all partnered hotels were full and offered to take his contact info, but he declined. Unfortunately, the surveillance cameras were down for 2 days, precisely the time the trio was allegedly seen. Soon after, a hotel owner on the island claimed he too hosted a Frenchman with 2 children between September 7th and the 14th. According to him, their appearance perfectly matched that of Yves Godard, Camille, and Marius. Both testimonies, the hotel owners and the tourist office employee, seemed credible, but no hard evidence confirms their identity. As the mystery deepens, the investigators begin to ask questions. Did these witnesses truly see Eve, or were they projecting a familiar face onto strangers? Godard was deliberately only stopping in remote islands, which he knew were harder to trace, sparsely populated, and hard to survey. The further north he went, the less likely French authorities could catch up to him quickly. This would be a good time to mention that Eve was an experienced sailor, and these islands were most likely familiar territories to him. He was more at an advantage being at sea than on land. But after further investigation, it became glaringly obvious that this whole thing was planned way ahead of his time. The deeper the investigators went, the clearer it became to them that this was premeditated. That each step, from the route taken to sea to the seemingly staged debris, suggested long-term planning. Someone had orchestrated this. And the more they dug into Eve's past and personal life, a new, much darker person came to light instead. The Eve Godard everyone knew, the kind, soft-spoken doctor devoted to his patients and children, was only half the truth. Since getting into a relationship with Marie-France, Eve had gradually began distancing himself from his former circles. His loved ones barely recognized him anymore. He slowly immersed himself in various spiritual practices. He even goes so far as to approach the IVI cult, or L'Invitation à la Vie, a controversial French spiritual movement founded in the 1980s, mixing elements of Christianity with alternative healing practices and beliefs. A group that Marie-France was also involved in as she tried to align herself with her husband's spirituality. This connection to IVI doesn't seem accidental. The Nick, which had been spotted at the Cove of Brehec, was anchored just steps away from the home of Yvon Schubert, the very founder of the IVI movement. In any case, it was now far too late to hope for clear answers from Yvonne. Months have passed since the family's disappearance, and if she had any connection to the case, she had more than enough time to cover her tracks. This lead would ultimately go nowhere, leaving the sectarian connection as a strange and unresolved footnote in the story of the missing doctor. And yet, Eve's dive into spirituality seems to mark a turning point. As he became more deeply involved in esoteric practices, it's clear he's searching for more than just inner peace. He begins to reject all established structure, until eventually, it's the entire system he seems to be calling into question. Among the many documents reviewed by investigators, one in particular stands out: an information sheet bearing the acronym CDCA, short for Confédération de Défense des Commerçants et Artisans. At first glance, the CDCA presents itself as a union defending small business owners, artisans, and independent workers. Its stated mission is to oppose the monopoly of France's social security system and the growing weight of taxation on professionals. But behind this facade, the CDCA reveals a much different face. Very quickly, their protests take a radical turn. Refusal to pay any social contribution, calls for civil disobedience, and increasingly aggressive demonstrations. Eventually, members of the union simply stop paying the state a single cent. At the head of the movement is a man named Christian Pousset.
Je vous incite à continuer à vous défendre avec les moyens que vous avez. S'ils sont juridiques, tant mieux pour les autres. S'ils ne sont pas juridiques, eh bien, tant pis pour eux.
Effectivement, nous devons régler nos problèmes par la rue. Nous allons le régler par la rue. Et nous irons le régler par la rue. Nous ne sommes pas, nous, des gens à se faire, et à chaque coup qui sera porté contre nous, nous riposterons.
A controversial figure known to the police, convicted to 2 years in prison for threatening a magistrate. Under his leadership, the CDCA crosses red lines. It's called a union, yes, but in practice, it's an opaque organization with murky ties to organized crime. Pousset doesn't just promote tax rebellion, he encourages his members to entrust him with their money, promising to protect it by placing it in tax havens, far from the eyes of the French government. From the moment he joins, Yves gets involved while staying true to his discreet nature. No protests, no visible action. To maintain his image as a respectable doctor, he opts for a quieter role, handling administrative tasks. But he doesn't just stay behind the scenes, he fully embraces the movement's ideology. He stops paying taxes, gives up his pension, severs all financial ties with his state, and eventually transfers all his assets to his children. Legally, he no longer owns anything, and therefore has nothing to be seized. In return, the CDCA offers him workarounds, health insurance in England, offshore investments, and bank accounts in tax havens. This discovery changes everything. How could a previously outstanding family man become entangled in such a shady network? And what if behind this reserved doctor was a far more prepared man than anyone ever imagined? A man with discreet connections, capable of activating a parallel network of not just radical political actors, but also spiritual followers, to throw off investigators, to stage disappearances, and to reinvent himself somewhere else. The police's investigation into the CDCA was cut short after receiving a second anonymous letter. This one read, Dr. Yves Godard is in the Harrius region, more precisely Lewis. Save Marius and Camille. Despite its anonymity, it was a lead they couldn't ignore. Whoever this was, they seemed to know something no one else did. Behind the scenes, investigators began referring to the sender by the nickname of the Crow. Just 2 days later, the French police received a new lead. A local employee on Lewis Island recalled selling a round-trip ferry ticket to a Frenchman traveling with 2 young children. French investigators would act in haste but failed to coordinate properly with the Scottish Crown Office, a necessary step for conducting law enforcement operations on UK soil. As a result, the Edinburgh police intervened. The investigation was deemed diplomatically inappropriate, and the operation was shut down before any arrest could be made. On the 27th, the French police left Lewis empty-handed, and the trail goes cold again. It's the 16th of January, 2000. While the police were following one mysterious lead after another, a new development had already occurred, one buried beneath the sea. A fishing vessel near Bass Island pulls in their net to find a canvas travel duffel bag tangled in it. Inside was a multitude of Yves' personal belongings. Soon after, more of Yves' personal belongings began washing up near the Ebehens archipelago, a place he had visited often in his youth to go sailing. Among them are business cards, a bank card, and his professional medical license. But something immediately stood out. The items are in almost perfect condition, surprisingly well preserved for something that should have spent years in the ocean. That is when a new theory takes shape. What if these items did not drift ashore naturally? What if someone had deliberately placed them there? Long after the disappearance, in order to mislead investigators. But who would that be, and why? One name quietly resurfaced: the CDCA. This secretive organization that Yves was involved in may be holding more answers than anyone imagined. The police would head to the office of the CDCA president to try and get information out of him. He would give them a record of a bank account opened in Portugal under Yves Godard's name, whose main shareholder is none other than Christian Pousset himself. But the hope is short-lived. When they access the account, they find that no transactions have been made since 1997, and a balance of around 2,800 francs. Behind the image of a protective union, the CDCA hid another face. Officially, they promised to help members escape tax pressure. In reality, those who insured their money no longer had control over it. Yves, like thousands of other small shopkeepers and artisans, may have seen his account emptied without his knowledge. What if Yves had become a victim of this large-scale scam, and was trying to recover his money by any means necessary? If Yves really was dead, maybe his death was no accident. But the investigation into Christian Pousset would come to an abrupting halt when, out of nowhere, Christian is mysteriously assassinated. His untimely death only raised more questions. Was the Godard family investigation threatening certain interests? Or was it just a coincidence? The shadows surrounding the case only deepened. Not long after, the doctor's insurance broker, another key figure in the CDCA's financial web, also dies under suspicious circumstances. During takeoff for a private flight from the Montpellier airfield, both engines of his planes would cut out, causing the aircraft to crash. When investigators examined the wreckage, they found the fuel tanks completely empty, despite the gauges indicating they were full. Could the experienced pilot really have forgotten to refuel, or had the plane been sabotaged? The financier's death raised even more questions. because he was directly responsible for managing an intricate network of offshore companies stretching from southern France to England to the Isle of Man, the same place where Eve and his children were reportedly seen multiple times. With Poussette dead and leads vanishing fast, what little remained of the CDCA's trail had already went cold. On the night of June 5, 2000, a fishing vessel working on the Bay of Saint-Brieuc between Le Petit-Légion and Rohaine pulled something unexpected from its nets. It was a fragment of a human skull. A few hours later, the crew recovered another bone, also human. The remains were sent for forensic analysis, and 2 weeks later, the results came in. They belonged to Camille Godard. She was only 6 years old at this time. Until then, there had still been hope that Eve had fled with his children and were possibly still alive somewhere under new identities. The discovery of Camille's remains shattered that hope completely. But this hope would completely die out only 6 years later, when a fishing trawler operating over Herds Deep, a deep underground trench in the English Channel, hauled up 2 more fragments of human bones in their net. A femur and a tibia. The remains were quickly sent off for forensic testing, and the results, the bones were confirmed to be Yves Godard's. His death was now officially confirmed. Instead of bringing clarity, however, this discovery only deepened the mystery. If Eve had truly vanished at sea in 1999, why did it take 7 years for his remains to appear, still without any traces of the sailboat? And why here, of all places? Herds Deep is no ordinary stretch of seabed. It's an immense underground trench known for being used as a dumping ground for toxic waste and discarded materials. It's hard to access, and even harder to search thoroughly. If someone wanted to get rid of a body permanently, this is where they would take it. Then, only days after the remains were identified, a new letter arrived. It was anonymous, but there was no doubt that this came from the Crow. What was strange about this letter, however, was that it wasn't a plea for help or a new lead. Instead, it claimed to know where Mary France's body was buried. On the back, it had a map, directing the police to the back edge of the town cemetery, specifically to a garbage pit behind a fence. Searching the spot, buried just beneath the surface, the police discover fragments of human remains, including parts of a skull, a tibia, kneecaps, and bones from an arm. There was no clothes or jewelry, and the bones had been placed shallowly in the ground. After weeks of forensic testing, the DNA results came back inconclusive. The bones had decayed to a point where proper DNA comparison wasn't plausible. But now, the authorities were left with even more questions. If the bones weren't Mary France, then whose were they? And how did the sender, or this Crow, know where to find them? How did the Crow know where Eve had been? And why were they trying to help the police locate him? Had they been involved? Did they witness something? Or were they part of a larger effort to manipulate the investigation this entire time? From that point on, the Crow would vanish, and no new leads emerged. The investigation stalled, and on September 14, 2012, the French justice system officially closed the case. All that remained was the confirmed death of a father and his daughter. The possibility of an accident was ruled out, but murder could not be officially declared either. As for the disappearances of Marie France and young Marius, they remained even today without answers. With the case officially closed, all that remains are fragments. A dead father, a dead daughter, a mother and son who vanished without a trace, a trail of personal items scattered in strange locations, letters from a person who seemed to know too much, and the quiet, deliberate movements of a man who, by all accounts, had flew underneath the radar for 7 years. The deeper investigators looked, the more it felt like someone had planned all of this in advance. The boat, the route, the stage debris, even a timeline of events. It all seemed designed to confuse. But some questions still hanged over the case, even now. Why was Eve's boat seen near the home of the IVI cult leader shortly after the disappearance? Was the CDCA involved in more than just the financial schemes? Why was Christian Pousset executed in cold blood when the police started investigating him? Who was the Crow? Were they helping out of guilt, or were they involved from the start? And the most difficult question of all, did Yves Godard really kill his wife, or was he set up this entire time? After all these years, all these questions still remain unanswered. And that's the most unsettling part, that after so much time, so much investigation, and so much loss, the truth may never come to light. And I'll leave it at that. And I will see you all very soon.